a year ago today, I was all set to go to Paris and go to an event about therapeutic gardening, and both Isabelle and Tamara were going to be there. And then for reasons you'll all be very well aware of, that event was cancelled. And it was very sad because a lot of work had gone into setting it up. However, the next best thing, as Isabelle put it yesterday, is to have these speakers here sharing their experience with us tonight. And so they're both going to share the presentation and tell us about therapeutic gardening, where France stands now. Isabelle is a clinical psychologist. After receiving training at the Horticulture Therapy Institute in the US, she started a blog about horticulture therapy in French in 2012 and was elected as the first president of the Fédération Française Jardins Nature et Santé in 2018. Tamara Singh is a mental health service provider trained in the UK, in New York, and in Paris. Horticulture therapist and art therapist, she provides a therapeutic approach that is based on media, art and nature. Her initial background in the social sciences, critical theory, crip and queer theories, post-colonialism and gender theory, and landscape history provide the lenses through which she practices trauma-informed treatment, independently and with several small NGOs. She's the treasurer of the Federation. And with that, I would like to invite Isabelle to start us off. It's my great pleasure to offer you the floor, Isabelle, and over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fiona, for organizing this series of events with your team, your great team, and inviting us. We're very happy to be here, Tamara and I. And if we can't meet in person, to be here tonight online and with people from around. You can all see the screen well enough, right? Good. So we are dividing this talk between Tamara and I. I'll talk first about where France has been before and where we are up to today with the creation of this federation you mentioned. And Tamara will talk about current projects that our members are part of, based on a survey that we did earlier this year. So you have really fresh information about what our members are doing. So maybe unlike the US and also probably the UK, there are no history of therapeutic gardening as early as World War I or II in France. We don't see signs of this, but things have been going on for a little while. There were some French pioneers, and two of them are described here. The first one was a psychiatric hospital in Western France, where the director hired a new head gardener in the 70s and asked him to sort of drown the whole place in green in order to make it a therapeutic environment for the patients, both with gardens in the different units, but also for the general park, the large area around the hospital, to be full of nature, essentially, and designed specifically to be therapeutic. Another example is in the 1980s, a program started by a medical team made up of occupational therapists and others for patients that were discharged from the hospital, mental health patients discharged from the hospital, fairly stabilized, to create a psychosocial rehabilitation program based on horticulture, based on growing plants, on working with plants for those patients. So those are two of the earliest programs that I know of in France that I wanted to mention. Two areas where horticultural therapy is most present in France is psychiatry on one hand, and seniors with or without dementia. Those are the two main areas, though there are many other types of programs in different other settings. So here we are, we're going to describe a few of those programs just to give you a flavor of what's been going on. One of those programs was started in 1997 at the Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris by the woman you see here in the yellow coach is Anne Rieb, and she's a nurse who then trained in landscape architecture to become one of the earliest practitioners of horticultural therapy in France. She started this program for children in the children's psychiatric unit of the hospital, mostly children on the autistic spectrum, and has been doing weekly sessions there with those children ever since, and with her and one of the medical staff. Here she's shown with an American horticultural therapist called Suzanne Riddell, if some of you know her. A second program, more recently, was set up at the teaching hospital of Saint-Étienne in the psychiatric unit. It was started by a psychiatric intern who saw the interest of bringing plants to the patients and worked with France Criou, who is also a member of our association, to do a collaborative work on creating this space that you see here called the Jardin des Mélisses. So they worked with the staff, with the patients, with the families, with all of the different parties to create this garden. And it is now a spot for weekly HT sessions, which are led by members of the medical staff, which have received training from France Criou, as well as a research project that is still underway. It's going to, in the end, have 190 patients involved, and to study the benefits for those patients of the program. Here you are, I'm going to do a little name dropping, but here we are in the garden for a day of a seminar in 2019. And the man sitting there is Roger Ulrich, who was the keynote speaker, and who then later on accepted to become an honorary member of our federation. So we're very, very happy about that, obviously. A third program in mental health is set in another psychiatric hospital near Paris called Théophile Roussel. And this was started with the support of the medical staff. The head psychiatrist is very much behind the program, and at a roundtable we held last month was able to describe what our expectations are of gardening for the patients. And also a particularity of this project is that they recently hired a dedicated part-time professional, which they're calling a jardinier médiateur, to be a member, full member actually, of the medical staff. He, in this instance, I think we can really say this is horticultural therapy, and as the patients are addressed to him, there are objectives that he's trying to set with them and with the medical staff. So this is interesting. To our knowledge, it's one of the first time, but a full-time professional, or part-time, but I mean dedicated to this goal in a French hospital. Seniors, as I said, is another public where there are a lot of population, where there are a lot of programs. One of the most well-known ones is this program in a teaching hospital in Nancy, in a unit for patients with dementia. And the head neurologist has been very pro horticultural therapy and gardening. And so this is the garden that has been created. It's used both by patients and staff members, as well as families, of course. But the patients, for example, are encouraged to use the garden at night if they become agitated, instead of using medication. And they are helped by staff to go down to the garden, even after dark, for example, to be able to be calmer and sleep better. This program has been the site also of many published studies by Dr. Jean Rose. And it's interesting because the studies are spanning the patients themselves, the nurses, as far as the reduction of burnout, for example. So this is one of the sites that is watched a lot because of the publications that have come out of their work. And there are many other examples of gardens designed in retirement homes with or without horticultural therapy activities per se. as a matter of fact, a national Alzheimer plan back in 2008 recommended that retirement homes have gardens. Obviously, we are still short of that objective, but it was recognized as something that would be a plus in retirement homes. So this is fairly encouraging. Though we will maybe mention some of the obstacles to recognition of horticultural therapy and more widely nature-based interventions in France. We could say that 10 years ago there was fairly little awareness. We mentioned some older programs, but they were exceptional, and just as a matter of fact, few people had heard about horticultural therapy. And we can really notice in the last 3 or 4 years a rise in interest. It's really has accelerated tremendously. There is another example, another obstacle, which is, I would call it a perceived lack of scientific studies, because as a matter of fact, there are many international studies. Maybe it's a fact that very few of them are published or conducted in France and published in French, but that is a kind of a thing that we're told, that there are no backup to the claims of benefits of horticultural therapy. 2 other obstacles of a lack of training. Really since 2012, a dozen short training modules have existed that people can take, but they're usually short, 3 days or so modules. The good news, though, is that as of this year, we have 2 training programs, both started in agriculture schools, based in agriculture schools, which is also sometimes the case in the US, but this was started that way. But they lead to a degree, though it's not an horticultural therapy degree per se, but we're moving in the right direction with a large number of hours of education, internships. So we're really moving in the right direction. But at this, to this day, there's a lack of professional status. There's no official horticultural therapy title in France per se. So that is still an obstacle. Before the Federation was created in 2018, there were obviously other things that had happened and that maybe led up to our creation. One of them was the first association created, Jardinsante, was created more than 10 years ago with the specific objectives of raising funds to start or to improve therapeutic gardens in medical settings. And their other objective is the organization of an international symposium. And that's the one, Fiona, you mentioned you were about to fly to a year ago. And as a matter of fact, Jardinsante is a member of our association, so we are definitely working together. Another milestone was the publishing of a first manual in French on horticultural therapy. You see it there. It was written by Jérôme Pellissier, who was a doctor in psychology, specialist of seniors, and who really gave French people interested in this field their first manual in French. Before that, you had to read English, essentially, to be able to learn about this discipline. So this was an important milestone. So we come to the creation in 2018 of the Fédération. So the Fédération Française Jardins Nature et Santé, meaning gardens, nature and health, was created to bring together professionals working in this field and feeling up to that point fairly isolated. Since, as we've mentioned, there's no title, they were all sort of doing things and not having many people to talk to and to rely on. So currently we have about 60 members in our 3rd year. Our members come from several backgrounds. They're either health professionals, so doctors, psychiatrists, nurses, physical therapists, psychologists, also administrative staff of medical establishments, or horticultural professionals who work who have specialized, who have geared their practice towards gardening and health. And there's a few others also, people practicing eco-psychotherapy, for example, so psychologists working in the wild, educators, people practicing more widely ecotherapy like Shirin-yoku or forest bathing, as well as some institutions. We mentioned jardinsante, but a few others as well, including some people financing gardens. So this is who has been attracted to this federation since it was started. The mission, we could probably summarize it in about 3 points. So it is to raise awareness about nature-based work in favor of global health, make it more known by the general public, but by also professionals, that this is a documented way to help people, both in prevention and in people with health problems. So we try to address both the general public, but also institutions, the health ministry, different government agencies, and different types of healthcare professionals, as well as, I should say, associations of patients, for example, which we've been trying to also talk to. It's also to contribute to the development of actual gardens and interventions. So people come to us when they want to start a program, and we're able to put them in touch with our members or a combination of several of our members working together. This happens more and more, that people come to us to ask for help because they want to start something, a program. And for our members, it's to provide resources and networking and people to work with. So those are, I would say, our main objectives. To finish, for my part, I wanted to maybe talk about some of the accomplishments, some of the highlights of what we've been able to do over the last 3 years. We're pretty proud of having a website now that has a lot of resources, both for the general public and for professionals. A site in French that brings some of the main information you might need about training, about what this is, about examples. Also, we have created already 2 local chapters, since it was a requirement and a need expressed by our members a year ago that they wanted to have more local ways of talking to each other. And actually, I think the person heading the Lyon chapter, Christine Butin, is with us tonight. And we have 3 more chapters in the works at the moment. We support other events happening that our members are part of or are creating. So that would include, for example, this seminar that I mentioned with Roger Ulrich in 2019. During the pandemic, like you, we've been able to do roundtables online. So that's also a way to bring people that couldn't really come to a physical event, but that can attend from anywhere in the world. One other thing we've done is participate, and Tamara has led us in this, in an Erasmus research project on how to create an HD association. And that's been an interesting experience to deal with all of this sort of work and meeting other people interested in this field in other countries in Europe. What we think we've accomplished also is become identified as a resource, both when people are looking for a speaker. For example, we'll be speaking later on this year to future hospital directors going through their compulsory training at the moment, and talking to them about the importance of nature as part of a day they're organizing on this theme. Or also, there's other examples of this. So as speakers, but also as resources to write different pieces of informational on HT. For example, the National Organization asked us to write a document to help professionals wanting to start an HT program for people with dementia. And so France Criou, I mentioned earlier, was able to write this piece, which will help a lot of people trying to create programs. And also another thing is we've become a member affiliate of the AHTA recently. So this has been some of our accomplishments with much more work to do, obviously, as this is becoming a subject that is of more and more interest in France. So with this, I'll be able to now pass it on to you, Tamara, and I'll stop sharing my screen. And here you are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, Isabelle, which gives us a good sense of the broad context in France, things in France, and as well as some of the historical milestones. So I'm going to take the next 10, 15 minutes or so to continue to share with you on the current situation of therapeutic gardens and horticultural therapy in France. So when Fiona first approached us to present something about the French experience to the international community of professionals, we thought it would be a good idea, an opportunity to give you, of course, a sense of what was going on generally, but also to give you kind of a snapshot of the current lay of the land, say. So, so we asked our members to help us out with some information that could be both useful and pertinent. And we did that by creating a survey. So in January, we sat down and we came up with a really short survey. Again, it's an informal survey. It's not hard science or according to social science expectations or standards. We just wanted to ask a few questions and that would be interesting to get some information that we could pass on. That said, admittedly, we also have in the back of our heads the idea that we would like to be able to have the opportunity to create another type of more formal survey one day. And so this, this gave us a chance to sort of tease out a few questions as kind of a probe or preliminary to help us in the future to frame better questions. So here I would like to present some of the results really quickly. So there were 10 questions in the survey. And again, the idea being that this informal approach would help us possibly think about how we would create a future database, because it's something that we're interested in. It's an ambition for the future, and it's something we might do together with the other important national organization that Isabelle mentioned, Jardinsante. So our members are located pretty much all over the country. We're not many, we're about 60. And when I say 60, it's not necessarily individuals, that's also representing NGOs, small NGOs, or small institutions. So the kinds of questions that we ask, again, what seems to be working? What are some of the problem areas? With an additional idea that the more we know, the better we can help as an organization, as a supportive professional organization. So let me tell you a little bit about the survey, which was built using a platform that's quite familiar, I think, called SurveyMonkey, and we asked 10 questions. We didn't want to scare off our members with too much hard work. The survey took about 4 minutes, and it remained accessible for about 6 weeks. Now, the questions are both open-ended and closed. Some of them were very straightforward, and others, it was possible for respondents to provide additional information. So it was both quantitative and qualitative survey. We had about 78 responses, And when I say response, I mean that it's more about projects and not about persons or institutions, so that one entity could actually submit several replies. Some people are more in the field are more active or have the opportunity to set up more projects. And that's interesting in and of itself. So that's something that we might be able to flesh out if we do a more elaborate, more sophisticated survey in the future. Right, so here we go with our survey. So we sent out a link to this survey in our newsletter, in our digital newsletter, to all of our members, and all of our members, active or allied, both institutional and personal, could respond. So one of the first questions we asked was, what was the framework of the project? What's the context? And as expected, a lot of institutional presence, so hospitals, long-term facilities, nursing homes. At the same time, about 50% are non-public initiatives, meaning they're not governmental or they're not institutional. So that would be charities or private ventures. We then asked what type of project were they referring to. So some of the projects were building and designing gardens. Other projects were concerned with the actual hardware, the building of a garden. Fewer projects concern programming, either in existing gardens or in therapeutic gardens. And this is something that would be interesting to try and gather more information about, because it would seem that one of the issues that we hear of frequently is that projects are being created, or rather gardens are being created, but there's a problem with sustainability because there's no one to continue with programming. We wanted to also know what kind of clients, what were the service users, the beneficiaries. And this was an open-ended question, which is why I presented the information that we gathered as a cloud. And so the bigger the word, the more the word returned in the responses of the 78 people who responded, or 75 people who responded to this question. And we're dealing mostly with people who have lost autonomy, who are dependent, the elderly. As Isabelle mentioned, a lot of the programming is for the elderly. We also wanted to know where the programs were, or the projects were being created. And given the institutional nature of a lot of the programs, it comes as no surprise that they're in urban or suburban areas. A lot of the institutions, health institutions in rural areas have been closing in the past 15, 20 years. So again, overrepresentation of projects in urban and suburban areas. We were interested also in learning about the intentions of the project. So if the projects were constructed or designed with the idea of outlasting their users. And it was the intention. It seems that this is the intention, that the projects are sustained and sustainable. But then given some of the other responses, it does beg the question, who is in a position, is there staff available to maintain these gardens or therapeutic programs? So 78% is is overwhelmingly the intention, but I think we do need to flesh that out in the future. Of course, we asked the big question, the big one, of the financial support, because this tends to be one of the issues that's of most concern for our professions and our professions, getting the funding, especially in a situation in a country where there's almost no recognition of this type of approach. So a few of the projects are depending on public monies, but it would appear that more projects are depending on actual institutions providing funding from their operating budgets. Because it was possible to reply to check off several of the options, it seems that there might be a bit of mixed funding also going on, and which is one of the reasons why I checked to see what other resources might represent, because there were so many of them who mentioned that. And it seems that this again, a cloud of words, and the one that came back most frequently was mécénat, and that's like charitable or charitable donations or sponsoring. So that would suggest private sources of financing. We are also interested in, given that the horticultural therapy or therapist is not recognized as a profession in France, we were interested in seeing, well, who's carrying the project, who's working in the project, what are the staff available for making sure that these therapeutic gardens or nature assisted programs are getting off the ground. And landscape architects are quite visible, as well as the gardeners. Very important in terms of just creating the spaces. But it was quite comforting to realize that a lot of the other types of staff were present as well: medical, educational, therapeutic staff. So the fact that we don't have horticultural therapists as professionals is not necessarily a disadvantage. It might be something very interesting to explore, the fact that we have so many different specialists who are carrying the projects. Another thing we were interested in was the research opportunities. This was the question that was most ignored in the survey. I'm not quite sure why. I don't know if there was a sort of an expression of frustration or, but in any case, it's comforting to know that at least 70% of the projects start with some form of research ahead of the project, which means that people are using whatever resources we can supply them with before they actually start building or creating the program. There are not many opportunities to evaluate projects, so that's something that we might like to investigate and explore also in the future. What are some of the hurdles to being able to evaluate a project? Is it a financial issue, getting funding? Maybe it's adherence to the project. That's something we would have to look into. We also asked about the time lapsed that elapses between the project brief and the project start or end. The other, which is quite a lot, 30%, has a lot to do, I think, with the pandemic, a lot of projects seem to be on hold. For the rest, it's pretty much spread out over, there seems to be quite a number of possibilities, and this would probably depend on the scope of the project. One of my favorite questions is the difficulties. This was the second most ignored question. Again, maybe an issue of frustration, I don't know. But in any case, it was interesting for us to see what might the possible hurdles and obstacles be to getting a project off the ground. And financial support comes out pretty much on top, almost. With the other, which I also looked into as a cloud of responses, because it was, again, qualitative reply. And what came out in this case was, you have to excuse all the prepositions, but a lot of issues concerning changes. So budget, project, and then changes. So changes perhaps in the team leaders, for example, or changes in management in the institutions would have seemed to be issues, along with funding. Right, so again, it's an informal survey, and we're very pleased that our members took the time to share with us some of the issues that they were having, or some of the problems. And there are a couple of things that seem to sort of pop out. And I think, of course, one of them is around the funding. Very often in France, one might expect institutional or governmental monies to be involved in institutional projects, especially. But it was interesting to see that private sponsorship seems to be a good source of funding, as well as I mentioned earlier, possibly mixed funding. So mixed solutions for funding. The other thing that popped out that I find particularly interesting, having been trained in the United States, where horticultural therapists are recognized as, and there's a lot of training opportunities, is that in France, there are all sorts of staff who are carrying the projects. And while it looks like a disadvantage, it might actually be a very interesting advantage, because it means that so many different people with different backgrounds come to the projects. It also speaks to the fact that, again, we don't have many training programs in France, but the future is looking bright. We have one long-term training program that will be starting sometime in the spring. So that's something that we're quite pleased with. Most of the training programs are actually quite short, but this one is going to be a bit longer. As I mentioned, one of the things that I also found interesting is that people are actually keen on using research for thinking about their projects before they start. And and it is actually a request made by our members at one point that we provide, as a federation, that we provide them with more access to research, especially since most research is in English. And so it's one of the things we're attempting to do is provide information in French about current research. As I mentioned, also a lot of programs seem to be stalling or taking a while to bloom and blossom, and some of that might have to do with the situation. And maybe a very specific issue in France might be this problem of how do we continue to support a project when the heads or the management is changing, when it's because of one individual specifically that a program is being carried forward. So this requires us thinking about other ways for creating adherence or attachment to programming. And that might mean more work with communities around the institutions. So I've come to the end of what I wanted to share with you concerning the survey. And I think it would be interesting now if we could share discuss, maybe have questions, and see maybe what we can learn from professionals elsewhere, if any of this are common issues, or if we are really that exceptional, as they say in France. Thank you very much. So
Thank you.
Share and okay.
Thank you, Isabelle and Tamara. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed listening to you both and learning. I've been scribbling furiously here. And it struck me that there are a lot of contrasts and a lot more in common. So when you mentioned isolation, that's one of the founding problems, if you like. One of the fundamental reasons why we exist in Trellis was isolation between practitioners. And we try to do what we can to overcome that, setting up a database of projects and doing surveys. Well, we've been through all that too, and we continue to try and develop and this thing of ephemeral projects, because the personnel change, someone leaves and the project folds because they were the key person. Changes of personnel, project funding and direction, sometimes they can be enough to fold a project, and we know about that here too. And the variety of different staff taking on the role of being a therapeutic gardener or practitioner is very much the same here. So that was really a fascinating insight. And the thing that I got really excited about at the beginning was the mention of the studies published from the Nancy institution. So I presume they're in French, but it would be great to take a look at them, because I don't think we're aware of those studies. And the other thing was the mention of Roger Ulrich, who is, of course, the guy behind the famous view from a hospital ward studies, which many people cite as justification for their gardening project. The patients seem to have different recovery, faster recovery, if they had a view of a green space rather than a man-made space. So this seems to be something fundamental that helps people really realize what therapeutic gardening is all about. So it's amazing that you had a seminar with him. So I'd like to just open up to questions, and I think Jo is going to voice the questions to you. Thank you.
Yep. I think some of the questions that were posted earlier you probably answered during the presentation, but hopefully I'll cover ones that maybe weren't. So first question from John was, did the Erasmus research project have a particular focus?
It's yours.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it did in a way. The program was, we were solicited by professionals in Eastern Europe, and it was a program that had as a focus working on how do you set up an association of professionals. That was one of the main things. How do you create an association of professionals? How do you grow an association, and how do you support the professionals with what kinds of tools? And so the idea was that we would have been working together with professionals in Slovenia, Germany, and well, we didn't get the funding, so it kind of fell through. But it was interesting to think about what does it take to get an organization off the ground, and what can be some of the possible goals and missions of the organization.
Thank you. A couple of questions about how funding was obtained for therapists, but I think you covered that in your survey quite well, and obviously quite a mix of ways. One question I wanted to ask, is there much development of community gardens, so gardens within community space, as opposed to, within hospitals or institutions? Does that have much progress in France? Is that a big thing there?
I would say yes, actually, if I take this one, in Paris alone, for example, there are many examples of community gardens or shared garden, as they call them. Nothing really, well, yeah, outside of Paris, there's some of what I guess in the UK you call allotment gardening. What I mean, right? Those places where you get a spot for each person to garden separately. But the community gardens and shared gardens are quite a thing. And there are many initiatives at the moment in larger cities to increase the involvement of citizens in planting, even in smaller spots, even in tiny spots around, for example, the base of gardens. So there's definitely an encouragement of that in France at the moment.
And do you think that's changed, Isabelle? Do you think that's increased over the years?
Oh yeah, for sure. In Paris, there's definitely different programs meant to encourage people to start gardening in the smallest of spaces. So yes, definitely increased in Paris at least, which is a place I can talk about the most.
Tamara, this is probably one for you. Were there any of the survey results that surprised you? Although you've highlighted some things, were the things that you thought, gosh, we didn't expect those kind of answers?
I think, I have to give that one, I think I was quite surprised by the fact that no one in the question about staffing, there was a section where people could fill in a few things if they wanted to, if they didn't find that they were represented in the question. And I think 2 people actually answered horticultural therapist. And so it was an anonymous survey. So I was very keen on wanting to know who those persons might be. I found that very bold. I was very pleased, and I found it also very bold. And because we didn't put it in the actual question because it's not recognized. We put only recognizable professions. So I found that quite amusing. Not surprising, but amusing, I guess.
So you mentioned about the formal qualifications and it's being recognized, which is the same scenario here, really. How do they gain skills, or what qualifications can they obtain in France? What opportunities are there?
Well, the 12 or so programs which have come about in the last 8 years or so, many of them involve people who are in our federation, and they are just short programs. I mean, they'll cover very quickly what horticultural therapy is, and in the best of cases be able to practice, or to have a sort of a garden where to practice it. So I think it's got all the roots of a program. It's just very short. It's not programs that are developed over, it's not a bachelor's or a master's degree. It's quite short. It's usually 3 days. Sometimes it's a little bit, or it's several sessions of 3 days based on the basics, then maybe designing a garden, then doing the horticultural therapy activities inside that garden. So it's just covering the basics at this point, the program that existed. The 2 new programs, one has started already and one is about to start, as Tamara mentioned. The one that started already doesn't focus only on horticultural therapy, but also on what you could call social gardening, creating programs more in social settings, and a few other things. So it's a one where the title that you would obtain is jardinier médiateur, so mediating gardener, but not only in health and medical settings, also in more social settings.
Pat asked a good question here. What do you see as the route towards getting the profession recognized in France?
That's a big question. That's a big question. I mean, given, as an art therapist, I speak, I suppose, as an art therapist, but given the difficulties we've had having art therapy recognized, and it's been practiced in France for at least well over 50 years in some of the larger institutions. And the Federation of Art Therapists in France has been around for 25 years, and they're still not very close to being recognized. So I don't know if that means that horticultural therapy might have to find a way of becoming a sort of a subsidiary discipline in another school. I don't know, in a landscaping school or in a gardener school or something like that. I don't know if we have in France the opportunity, and then there are lots of political issues in terms of the academics and things like that we'd have to deal with. I don't know. What do you think, Isabelle?
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting to note that the two programs are longer, over several hundred hours, and more geared toward actually a degree. I've been started in the schooling, the agriculture schooling, and not the general university, or not in the trade in general. So I don't know if that's one way to look at it, to go at it from that direction. But I think we would be very interested also in seeing medical programs interested in this, or not just one aspect. As we've said, there are so many people involved in both programs that we're excited, but those two programs were started in that type of school, but we would like to see other types of school, maybe for nurses, or for, just get interested as well. And maybe it is one way to look at it. Maybe it's a class added to something else and not a full, whatever. There are many ways to look at it. There's also in French school, I was diplôme universitaire, which was sort of specialization. After you have a degree, you might go back to university for this very specialized training. So this could be another form, and that would be taking place in the general university setting. Different possibilities.
Lovely, thank you. Yes, that lots to look forward to there. Jenny made the comment that it was interesting that the lack of sustainability of projects was due to the lack of staff. And is that, do you think, the lack of money to fund staff, or the lack of medical staff's gardening knowledge, or both?
I'll have a go. I think some of it has, of course, to do with funding. There have been so many budget cuts in France in public health institutions, so it's not easy to just hire new staff, and so it would require perhaps using involving staff that's already in place, but then that staff would need to be trained in some way, having additional training. So I think, again, one of the things that is a problem is, it's one thing to create a therapeutic garden, but then there's another, which is how do you ensure that it's sustained over several generations of patients and users and beneficiaries.
Lovely, thank you. I think we've just got a couple more questions. Do you know kind of what the average size of projects are? So say how many clients they support, or number of hours that they operate?
That's what we're going to put on our future survey. That's a good question.
Excellent. Excellent. And just one other question. Is there a level of informality in the projects on offer rather than being more formalized? I think, which is one question. And also, is there an effective way that these different projects can network with each other and share good practice?
Mm-hmm. Well, if by formality you mean having a set time for the activity to take place and that kind of thing, maybe that's what the question meant. I don't know. I think programs some programs like the one in Santé in mental health that I mentioned, as programs, there are the medical staff accompanying the group rotates. There are different times set up for this activity, so there's definitely formality. And I think that we could find other programs that are more informal, but yeah, I think there's definitely a variety. And I think as far as connecting with each other, I think that's what our Fédération was trying to do, right? It was to get the professionals to connect. And sometimes what we find out is that people discover that something was going on near them and they didn't know about it. Also in the Saint-Étienne area, which is where one of the two existing chapters has started. That's one of their big projects, is to really create a network of existing gardens to talk to each other. And I think that's important because you might know there's something else going on the other side of the country, but you might not know the different resources you have around you. And maybe it's time to mention another kind of thing that we've already now seen 3 different examples of in France, which is a central garden started by a group where institutions come on a weekly basis or monthly basis to practice HD activities, which I don't know if you have that in Scotland. I know other countries probably have that, but we're seeing a little bit of that develop. And I think that that's also a place where people come together, since different institutions for seniors, for young people, for people with different disabilities can come in and sort of be in one place.
Yeah, I think that's what we quite often call a community garden, which I'd mentioned earlier. Yeah, so
Okay.
we're different. Yeah, people use the space. I've got one last question. Otherwise, I think Fiona will cut me off here. But and it's a good one. Was about do the projects tend to use volunteers as well as paid staff? Because that's quite a crucial part, I think, of a lot of the projects in the UK.
Mm-hmm. I'm going from my own database, my internal database. What do you think, Tamara? I think we hear of some volunteering, but I think France is not as volunteer focused as some maybe other, like the US, which I know more.
I think the small NGOs, the smaller NGOs would use volunteers, and in France, the NGOs by almost by law they're not if they're how do you call it,
non-for-profit?
Not-for-profits, yes, the not-for-profits. They would be run by volunteers, and so they would set up. There are cases of small NGOs setting up programs, right? And they work with what they can get, it would seem.
But as a matter of fact, I think trying to bring in somebody to run an HD activity within a retirement home, let's say, it's been the challenge, right? Is to get that person to be considered a professional and paid for the service, as opposed to be asked to come in as a volunteer. I think that's one of the challenge in France. I think it's a challenge in other countries as well. But it's one way to look at it. I mean, if you were offering HD activities on a free basis, you might, get a lot of people to call you up and want you to come in their institution. That's kind of another way to look at it. But yeah, I think that to also have this activity be recognized as a profession and as a contributing factor to the health and well-being of the people, you also need professionals.
Yeah, indeed. I'm going to ask this question, and then Fiona can cut me off if she wants to. One last one was: have doctors or GPs recognized the worth of therapeutic gardening? So, we start to see some green prescribing and things here where doctors are, and is that something that's happening in France?
I have not come across any GPs sort of making subscriptions for vitamin N. I don't know about you, Isabelle. I don't have.
Yeah, Christophe André, who's a leading psychiatrist, a very mediatic psychiatrist in France, has talked about vitamin N for nature, whatever he calls it. I mean, he's recognized it in some of his books, but that doesn't mean that it's prescribed. We've heard recently that Canada is really has a pretty extensive program to have GPs prescribe nature, but in France, we're pretty far off still. But we're encouraged to see that our association has attracted some, not many, doctors, psychiatrists, people who are, hopefully going to go in that direction, but no official recognition yet. No.
Yeah, and just as which tacks on to another question that was actually asked about the culture of gardening in France. I think some of it has to do with the relationship that the French have with nature, and that's just a long history that we don't have time to get into here, but there is something very specific about how the French interact with nature.
Yeah. Lovely, thank you. I will stop asking any more questions. Hand over back to Fiona.
Thank you. I could talk all night. There's so many discussions there that I would love to extend, and I think many people in the audience here feel that too. So we'll just have to arrange some more events, either in person or online, because there are so many people that, and we're discovering people through these seminars that we didn't know. We tried to find an Italian speaker, and I just Googled the wrong things, I think, but they're here with us tonight. And so we've got to have some more events, because there are so many things we have in common and so many things that we could learn. When we hear you talking about all those questions, there are things that we've thought about too, and probably haven't had an answer yet. I've come up with an answer. I'm developing a weird echo here, so apologies if anyone can hear that. Okay, I really I'm very grateful to you both for all the work that's gone into that, and for presenting so well, so eloquently and so well tonight. And I think everyone else feels the same, and I would just invite everyone here to show their appreciation. You can use the reaction button down on the bottom right, or you can just go wild with some actual applause on your screen. Thank you to you both. There are also some lovely comments in the chat saying how much people have enjoyed this, and thanking you both. So our very sincere thanks for presenting tonight. We just a few sort of final points from us. We run these seminars for free, and everyone gives their time for free. But if you would like to give a donation to Trellis to help us continue to run these events, the link will pop up in the chat box, or you can go and do that via the website. And there is also our plastic-free gardening book, proceeds of which go to support our work too. So the link for that will pop up in the chat too. So on that note, it's goodbye from all of us here at the Trellis team. Goodbye to both of you, Isabelle and Tamara, and goodbye to all of you, the audience. Thank you for giving your time and for sharing this with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.